this is how you get to talk about that old axe to grind, that Dracula is just a huge sex machine, right? Or just a big sex symbol. That's what all it is.
That's totally what
That's
I believe.
all Dracula is.
Time to discuss. I don't know if you've heard this before, Mike, but Dracula is actually just symbolism for sex. Have you heard that before? Vampires are just, just a vehicle to be salacious.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah.
I know that's like cutting edge stuff. I know that's the hot
cutting
take.
edge stuff. Yeah. It's biting.
It's a biting commentary.
Biting social commentary.
I don't mean to poke your sensibilities too hard. But
you're driving me batty and everyone else. Yeah.
Welcome to the Voyage podcast, a show that traverses the oceans of myth and legend through the lens of Catholic theology and philosophy. Come aboard as we set sail in pursuit of the heroic life and Christian virtue, with your hosts, Mike Schramm and Jacob Platty.
Welcome everybody to this episode, Jacob's favorite episode of the Voyage podcast, and you'll find out
the only reason I signed up to do this.
We finally get to have a redemption of Dracula. See, I had to keep him around for almost 9 months. We started back in January, so now I guess it'd be 10 months, right? Because we're at the end of October with our Monster Month, our Halloween episode, and the Monster of Monsters, right?
I had to wait 10 months. I bided my time for 10 months. Like an old Eastern European count, waiting for the right time.
Like an eternity.
Yeah. Yes. Oh man, I love this book. I love Dracula. Of there's really only a handful. I can count on 2 hands probably how many books I've reread. Right, most of the time I read a book, move on. Read a book, move on. Dracula is probably the one that I've reread the most, actually. Now, did you finish it? I know that you were reading it at one point. Did you
alas, I did not. No, I did. I started it, and I don't know. I can't remember what the percentage was. It was the ebook.
Common opinion is that it drags in the middle. Okay. Pretty much everyone says that it drags in the second half, and so you probably didn't make it through. You probably couldn't persevere, which I would expect nothing less. But
it wasn't the perseverance of the saints on this one. So it was actually at the Van Helsing when he is, I think, is it Lucy that they're tending to? Dr. Seward.
You didn't get to the death of Lucy?
I don't think so. No.
Oh, you suck. That's right.
Yeah.
Pun intended.
Nice.
Dude, that's one of the best scenes. That whole, all the Lucy stuff, some of the best. Honestly, dude, you probably made it you might have been halfway. Shame on you. Did you watch any Hammer horror movies? Did you watch any Dracula movies? I told you to watch Hammer Dracula.
No, I didn't watch any Dracula movies either.
This is a podcast where we pride ourselves on being...
How does it feel to have a partner who doesn't prepare?
Yeah, in this podcast, we take preparation seriously. I'm really disappointed in you not holding yourself up to our high standards.
50% of the time, one of us does. So I didn't say which one, because again, sometimes it's one or the other.
I guess, it's one of these days we'll both be properly prepared, but today is not that day, I guess.
I acquiesced to a lot of monster stuff this month. So let's, I feel like this is enough banter, Jacob. Let's get into
okay, you want to get into?
Yeah.
Dude, by all means, man. You don't have to ask me twice. Okay, so here's the thing. This is something. This is an axe for me to grind. This is a stake for me to shave, if you will.
There we go.
Because, right? Evidently, I think that no one has actually read this book. I think that obviously a lot of people have, academic types have read this book, but they have just completely maligned what the actual experience of reading this book is truly like. And I think that what people think the experience of the book Dracula is insanely far removed away from what the actual Dracula experience is, which is to say, Christian propaganda. And I mean that I'm not using those words. Those are the words that, like, for funsies, I went and like started looking up, like SparkNotes, Wikipedia,
and not a pejorative
all these different,
either,
yeah, like just to see like what the status quo commentary on this book is according to the interwebs, circa 2023. And in a number of those, you'll see, like, specifically, I was reading the SparkNotes. It's the one I read the most of. And when, they'll break down the themes, right? But then you get into the paragraphs of them, and like they repeatedly talk about how much Dracula is Christian propaganda. So, parents, if you want to introduce your children to a novel that modern academics refer to as Christian propaganda, I have got the book for you.
A classic.
And it's a classic. And honestly, it was super popular when it came out. Like, there was this kind of don't let anyone say that the book floundered, right? It didn't. It was really, really well received. And it was so popular that it got turned into like stage performances and things like that. It became an international hit. So you have it being translated into different languages or whatever. And, it was written in 1897. So it's right at the turn of the century. And it was, a really, really popular phenomenon for a while. And that's why within 20 or 30 years, you have movies being made out of it, which film was a brand new art form at the time. So it's very interesting that some of the earliest films we have for mass audiences are actually adaptations of Dracula, right? It really kind of goes to show.
The thing is, too, if you're going to invest, if it's such a new technology, it's going to be more expensive. You're going to invest all this money in, you want to make sure you get a return. And so what stories did they choose to invest? It's going to be on something they think is the most popular.
People are going to come check out. Yeah. And they did. Obviously, Universal's Dracula starring Bela Lugosi, that really set the template for the popular culture consensus of like what Dracula is, for sure. But it was huge. Yeah, it was a phenomenon, right? So this is a good book. It's definitely an older book, right? So it might not be for everyone, Mike. But it's what you can't take away from it is how much it just like drips with Christian iconography and Christian sentiment. But it's far more nuanced and interesting, and it's not like a cheesy Christian sentimentalism. It's way more than that. And that's what I'm going to talk about.
And what's funny
today.
too is you're touching upon an interesting idea that it's so iconographic, that it's so sacramental in its presentation, and yet Bram Stoker was not a Catholic or an Orthodox.
That's
was
true.
A Church of Ireland. So basically, it's like Irish Anglican sort of flavor. But so a Protestant, like Church of Ireland / Church of England, Anglican, that sort of around that sort of area. And yet, not only do we have positive Catholic character in Van Helsing, but the whole kind of sacramental worldview is presented in a very it's assumed almost. It's not even like you have to justify it. It's
that's
not
going
like
to be,
you have to.
Yeah, that's going to be a really, really important element of the real, like the text of this story. I do think so Bram Stoker was really famously reclusive, right? He was like a shy man, and he didn't really leave a lot of commentary. We do have like his notes when he was making Dracula, and I haven't actually read those. It's one of those things I need to get around to doing sometime. But they don't, evidently, from what I can tell secondhand, is they don't really give people a whole lot of like real meaty, I guess, like into the headspace of Bram Stoker, even though we have these notes, right? I guess they're fairly pragmatic notes, I suppose. I haven't read them myself. But so people, there's so much. One of the reasons why there's so much interpretation of Dracula academically is because Bram Stoker didn't provide much commentary on it, right? And so you're stuck with just the text in a lot of ways. I think the text speaks for itself, though, for what it's worth. But what I want to say about Bram Stoker is that his wife converted to Catholicism. And I'm not sure when she did in the context of Dracula. I'm not sure if it was before, after, during, I don't know. But I do know that he was married to a Catholic, right? And he was married to a woman who was at least inquiring for a while. I don't think that he was unsympathetic to the Catholic Church. We know that he never converted to the Catholic Church, but his book, the hero of his book, is a Catholic who uses Catholic means to fight evil. Just saying, right? So even if he didn't convert, his wife did, and he probably just it wouldn't surprise me if he just had a certain loyalty to like his Irish Protestant roots, because we're talking about an era of time in which it was really politicized and like really culturally kind of important to pick a side.
And we're not going to go down that rabbit trail, but like
No.
basically after the Westphalia Treaty, where it's like it all became political, and that's where that's one of the reasons, like you said, it became so difficult for people who maybe recognized this more ancient Christianity to not necessarily go that
do it in public.
That explicit route of actually converting.
Yeah, so we don't know much, but it's pretty easy for me to believe that Bram Stoker was really, really sympathetic. His book is, Dracula certainly is, as a novel. So what I think I want to do is just do a brief refresher on the vampire lore, because we did a whole episode on this last week, because it's important to have that context for when we start to just discuss Dracula, right? So in
review of vampires in general.
30 seconds to a minute.
Or should we say, go back and listen to the vampire episode.
Or go back and listen. Yeah, absolutely.
Pump those numbers up, right?
Yeah, that's right.
No,
listen to it
sure.
like 5
30
times.
seconds.
Yeah.
30 seconds. So
vampires are parasites. They hunt their loved ones, i.e. their family members specifically.
They're not enemies of werewolves. They're friends with werewolves, because
they are werewolves.
They are
werewolves.
The same function.
Werewolves who die become vampires. And vampires turn into wolves because they could do it in real life, like when they were still alive, so they can still do it when they're undead. They're the same creature, people. And it's all witchcraft. It's all packed with Satan stuff. Vampire lore is specifically Christian lore.
It goes back to actually, before we even were talking about vampires, we were talking about zombies, we were talking about monsters, how it's sort of and it's connected to zombies as it's death that follows you around. It's death that you can't escape from. And in this way, and like you said, it's living death or undead, right? Yep. That's what zombies are. That's what, vampires are. So it's sort of continuing that same logic or that same principle.
Well, and specifically within the lore tradition, it's an excommunicated death. So within the context of Eastern European folklore, there was this belief that emerged where if you are dead, died, excommunicated, or by other means of excommunicating yourself, your body cannot die the way God intended it to die. And because it cannot die the way it intended to, it's undead. So you're not alive anymore, but you're not dead according to like the laws of God. And so you come back as a pestilence, as a plague upon your community.
It's ironic that it's a corruption of the tradition of incorruptibility, which you'll find in the church, where a saint's body or a part of a saint's body will not corrupt. It will not decay, without any sort of, not by any natural means. And so this is sort of, like I said, the corruption of that, in that it's an unnatural way or an anti-God, anti-faith sort of way of going about
Absolutely.
that.
No, it is, and everything about, because vampire lore is specifically Christian lore, and I keep emphasizing that because a lot of people have watered down the idea of vampirism to be any type of blood-sucking creature, because those types of phenomenon like folklore exist all over the world, because ancient people understood that the blood is the life, right, as it's said in the Old Testament. So it's not surprising that every culture on the planet has blood-sucking as a motif. Vampires are not just another bloodsucker, though. Vampires are excommunicated Europeans who are kicked out of the church and come back to assault Christians with satanic powers.
See, but you can't threaten people nowadays by saying that if you're excommunicated, you're a vampire, because that will actually make it sound cooler. Like, it's like,
so my skin will sparkle?
Yeah, it's like, you can't even say that, because now it makes it sound, now excommunication sounds appealing if you say, hey, you're going to be a vampire.
Are sparkly vampires an inversion of Christian theosis, Mike? Who knows? As much
Yes.
as I
Oh,
poke
sorry.
fun at that,
No.
yeah, as much as I poke fun at those stories, we've barely touched those, and we're not going to, not in this
We've
episode.
actually not even touched theosis as much as I thought we would,
Oh, as a pod.
explicitly.
Oh, just within the.
Like,
Well, we'll
I
get
thought it'd
there.
be
Actually, that'll probably play up in this episode a little bit. I've been so busy lately that I never got to finish the outline for this, and there's already still like 5 pages.
I was gonna say it's
But,
gonna
like,
make up.
there's so much
cover
that
an
I could
episode. Don't
talk.
worry.
Yeah, it'll cover an episode. But anyway, everything about
Monster
satanic
Month does not go into November. It does. I'm
no,
drawing
we're
the
done.
line.
We're
Yeah.
done. Oh, I'll draw the line. You need to. Christmas is a Christmas like December holiday. Halloween is an October holiday. And they had the stuff out in August for
Mhm.
Halloween this year.
As soon as you take the back to school stuff out,
Shame
put that
on
away.
you, pop
Yeah.
culture, America / Walmart.
Oh, you're not gonna go after capitalism? That's good. All
No,
right, keep going.
capitalism. For sure I will. I will say that. Like, hey,
Unbridled.
stop it. Stop it. Anyway, yeah. So yeah, we're done. We're done after this episode. And it's time to move on because that's what makes it special. If
Mm.
every month is Halloween month, Mike, then no month is Halloween month, Mike.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Well put.
Yep. So yeah, so everything about vampire folklore is a inversion of Christian sacramentality. Just explicitly so. Born in the context of that. So what we also pointed out last episode is by the time you get to the 19th century, you know what I didn't cover in the last episode is there was something called the vampire craze. And we
Okay.
forgot, we just never got to it. But you know how there was like the witch craze? Everyone knows about
Yeah.
the witch craze because of like
Sure.
Salem and the witch trials and Puritans and all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
There was a vampire craze, Mike. The 17th century or the 18th century was chock full of vampire sightings.
Now, was that fueled by misogyny, xenophobia, or was it anti-Catholicism? Because that's ultimately all the witch craze was, is misogyny. So since vampires can be boys, that can't be misogyny. It must be xenophobia. Is that what you're gonna?
Honestly, it was no. It was rooted in like fear of death, all the stuff that we talk about, right? Because what is like you have all these examples of people being like, oh, vampires coming back or whatever. So official government agencies like the Austrian government or like the Holy Roman Empire were sending out doctors to like exhume bodies and investigate.
Put a drive a stake through.
Yeah, literally, because what
Just
really happens? Sure. Yeah, all of these doctors come back and they're like, yeah, it looks like vampires are real, and so like, and so. Look it up, folks. It's fascinating. It was a thing. It was a real thing. And you had like theologians commenting on it, writing out big treatises on like, if vampirism is real or not. It was quite the touchstone for European culture. But I don't know, for whatever reason, we don't like historically remember that the way we remember like the witch stuff. Maybe because of feminism. I don't know. But so anyway, in the 19th century, 100 years ago, these vampire things become this pop culture phenomenon across Europe. So they start writing about it in the 19th century. So that's why you get like a handful of like stories about vampires popping up. And Bram Stoker, that's why I think that's why Bram Stoker does
He's
it.
just hopping on that gravy train, right?
He's hopping on the bandwagon, of vampire fiction. And so that's why. But what's fascinating about Stoker's novel is that it is probably the best example of embracing the Christian tradition in response to this vampire stuff. Because every other story that had been written, they all, the best ones contain like the Christian elements in them. But Stoker, it's just super textual in his work. And I guess what we can do is get into some context for the world of Bram Stoker, right?
Okay.
Because that's what makes Dracula such a fascinating book. Bram Stoker, he's writing in the late 19th century, published in 1897. This is the birth of, this is a very specific time in British history and European history. This is, Darwin has happened, right? The Origin of Species has come out. Technological industrialization has occurred. Globalization is occurring at a rate that it just couldn't have done before. These like kind of modern industrialized means of transportation, like steamships or
Well,
trains.
and one of the things that the setting of Dracula provides is it's got this sort of like accessible but still very foreign feel to it. And that's sort of where, like you said, travel is becoming possible, but it's not necessarily something where it's like everybody is traveling all over the world. And so you can still have these areas where it's like, I mean, I say a cult in the true sense of the word as hidden, where it's like you've got these places where it's like, oh yeah, I'm this traveler who came back from this place. I'm going to tell you about all the mysteries, all the wonders from this, part of
Well,
the world.
that becomes a hobby unto itself. Really, there's a lot of parallels with like modern 21st century, like TikTok or Instagram, things like this idea like of social media has basically turned everyone's life into like, look what I'm doing, look what I'm doing, look what I'm doing.
Hmm.
There was when the frontiers were opened in the 19th century, you really had this new zeitgeist of like exploring the unknown and like going and traveling places. And
Hmm.
so Europeans were zigzagging in ways that they just hadn't done before. And travel fiction, travel literature, travel guides were a
Hmm.
super popular form of entertainment. People would go and just read books about other cultures because it was all new. It was like, oh, that's fascinating. I mean, they wear that over there or they eat that kind of food over there. That's all brand new in the
So what I'm
zeitgeist of Bram
hearing is
Stoker.
Bram Stoker just wanted to be a travel influencer. He's just a
Yeah, he
proto
was
travel
that was
influencer.
another fad that he was popularizing on with Dracula because Dracula is very much about the world shrinking and being opened up, the frontiers being opened up, and the anxiety that comes with the unknown, right?
Mm.
And these, strange new cultures and things like that, right? Very much a theme in Dracula. But he is also so we've talked about how he's right in the context of like travel, the travel craze and things like that
Mm.
and new frontiers. He's writing in the aftermath of industrialization. And I touched on Darwin, but like that scientific revolution. So it's post-industrial revolution, it's post-scientific revolution. And so and Bram Stoker was a fan for sure. Bram Stoker was one of those, he was a techie. That's who
Mm.
Bram Stoker was. He loved the latest gadgets.
Hmm.
And it was, you could tell it was like a hobby of his. So like his book, it's hard to get into the headspace if you don't know to. But his book reads like if I was going to write a novel the way that Bram Stoker writes a novel, it's like, and then I got into my Tesla and I checked my iPhone watch. And then I was
Mm.
like, oh, and the data was being down. It's almost like a Michael Crichton novel. Like
Okay.
he bakes into the story a lot of like the cool hip new technologies. So for example, one of the things that we haven't mentioned yet is if you read this book, it's epistolatory. It is a book that is delivered, the story is delivered through people's diary entries, letters, newspaper clippings,
Mm.
or pertinent to this context of the conversation, the phonograph of Dr.
Mm.
Seward. So Dr. Seward is one of the main characters. Everything that you read in his chunks of the book, he's delivering that to an audio file. And so the book is conveying that this is the transcript of an audio file that has
Mm.
been recorded, which in 1897, that's like
Yeah.
super new. It's like
Well,
you
it's kind of
recorded
like,
sound, like
do you kind of remember in the early 2000s when it was such a popular thing in especially the like teen, like high school-ish setting movies where they would give you exposition by people texting each other? It's kind of that same
oh
idea where it's
yeah,
like
it is.
it's to
Yes,
show
yeah,
how cool the
absolutely.
writers are. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yep, yep. And the book itself, so what is really cool about what Bram Stoker has done with this novel, for a modern audience like us, is he is intentionally trying to address the juxtaposition of the old and new, because up until this time, you have a medieval world, and he's writing in the revolutionary aftermath of the Enlightenment, and what this book is trying to do is trying to embrace both.
Hmm.
I think that Bram Stoker, I suspect that this was him trying to come to terms with the newness of reality and the
It was a
as it
brave new world.
transitions.
It was a brave new world he was experiencing.
He is in that lineage of commentary on modernity,
Mhm.
commentary on the transition
And he
of
actually
from
would have
medieval
been
into
a
the modern.
contemporary of Aldous Huxley's dad, who was a scientist
hmm
too.
Well, he was also writing in the time of H.G. Wells
Mhm.
and Jules Verne and all these other. So this is the technophile and constant reference to like science and and learning and all that stuff that you find in Dracula. It's in the context of, again, a zeitgeist that's really embracing like these new ways of learning, these new ways of exploring scientific achievements and things like that. Um, all of that stuff, that's all wrapped up, and that's cool. So what makes Dracula cool is that you have a book that's like saturated with Christianity, but it's also super optimistic about
Mhm.
technology. It's super optimistic about the kind of like new way of doing things and whatnot.
Yeah.
And so he gives us an example of a story that these don't have to be enemies. You know, science and faith, reason and faith are not bad guys. Like they're not opposites to each other. His biggest character, most iconic character, Van Helsing, as
Yeah.
far as the good guys go, he is a scientist. He is a scientific doctor, but he's also someone who is extremely well versed in like all forms of knowledge,
Well,
including theology.
he takes his faith seriously. Yeah. So he takes
Yeah, and
his
he's a super
scientific
faithful Catholic.
and he takes the supernatural evil seriously. Right. And
He
obviously
does.
it's because of that faith that, we see that too.
And
So
he doesn't do it naively. Like he basically says in the text that like I wouldn't have believed this either, but I have an open mind. And so because I have an open
mhm,
mind, I just kept exploring it and I just followed the evidence and the evidence is this and so I accept it. So he's not presented as just like a naive superstitious fellow. He's just
now Jacob,
more open-minded than everyone else is.
you said towards the beginning of this episode that you suspect nobody's read Dracula. And I unfortunately helped confirm that suspicion a little bit by only getting about, I'm going to say generously, about halfway through. So I
Yeah.
think what we should do is maybe take us through, like I said, the Cliff Notes, the Spark Notes version of the plot, or if you want to just spend a little bit more time on, some of the parts, or as you go through, we'll kind of talk about some of
No,
the
good point. Yeah.
important themes and stuff.
That's a really good suggestion. Okay. Dracula, one of my favorite books. Dracula opens with Jonathan Harker. He is traveling to Transylvania, Eastern Europe, on behalf of his law firm to do some real estate stuff with this ancient Count Dracula guy. And while he's traveling there, all the peasants he's encountering are all like, "Oh, you're in trouble. Don't go there. This is like Walpurgis Nacht. This is the night of the
Mm,
devil. Don't do that." And the entire time he's all like, "I'm a modern British citizen. I don't believe in all this silly superstition.
yeah.
I'm a Protestant. I'm not Catholic like you weirdos." And they force him to take a crucifix, and he's like, "Well, I've been trained not to care about these baubles, but just to make you feel
Yeah.
good, I guess I'll take it, right?" So there's a lot of kind of like religious commentary going on.
Mm,
He gets to the castle. In the first 40 pages of this book, this whole initial intro to Jonathan Harker, like encountering Dracula the first time, this is some of the best Gothic fiction, like hands down. The first 40 pages of this book are awesome, awesome storytelling, really creepy, good, kind of spooky storytelling.
mm.
Uh, when he gets to the castle, he quickly realizes that he's trapped there, that this Dracula guy is really strangely nefarious, and he's not going to let him leave. And, there's weird ladies in the castle that they put their seductive wiles on him.
See?
But then I know there it is. There, I'll give it to you. That's 1 point for the opposition. We'll come back to it. But then Dracula shows up with a baby and he's like, "Hey, eat this baby instead." Because, Dracula, he's such a charming fellow, right?
Mhm.
Certainly the icon of masculinity that we all know and love. And so, yeah, they turn their attention away from Jonathan and they go eat the baby instead. And then when the mother shows up later, he sicks a bunch of wolves on the mother and she gets eaten by wolves. So, Dracula, quite the anti-hero. Am I right? But he's just dark and gritty, bro. You just don't understand. He's actually a sympathetic character.
Misunderstood.
Yeah, right? But so he gets trapped at the castle. He manages to basically escape by jumping into the river afterwards. Meanwhile, Dracula has taken all the accommodations that Jonathan has made for him, and he's traveled back to London. And there he encounters the people in Jonathan's life that were left in England. So you have Lucy. Lucy Westenra is his fiance's best friend. And then you have the three suitors for Lucy. You have Quincy Morris, who is this American cowboy type, because it's the frontier. It's the new world, right? And so Bram Stoker wants one of his characters to be this crazy American cowboy guy because
archetype,
because people in England are like fascinated by the Wild West. It's like, oh, let's have a cowboy. This is a very like Avengers Assemble type cast of characters. He definitely has all these like, oh, let's put a cowboy in there. That'd be cool, kind of thing. And so Quincy Morris is the cowboy archetype. He's one of my favorite characters. He hardly does anything in the movie, but I love his character. And then you have Arthur Holmwood, who is the nobility. He's the aristocratic upper cruster of the group. And within the context of Britain, it's still very much a class system, right?
He's the stand-in for the audience, right?
He is, well, not the audience. He's a stand-in for the aristocracy. And the aristocracy within England is still a very idealized, they're high blood, right? Literally.
Devoted to honor, devoted to...
Yeah, well, and the whole society still admires, this kind of upper crust genteel honor culture, right? So that's Arthur Holmwood's purpose. And then you have Dr. Seward. He is the middle class scientist, right? So that's his archetype. Because the middle class at post-industrial revolution, post-commerce, post-trade, post-capitalism, right? Suddenly you have a lot of people gaining wealth and gaining access and upward mobility. That's all new in Bram Stoker's time. So to have a doctor not born to the aristocracy, just born to some lower class parents, but he has gained his respectability.
Pulled himself up by his bootstraps.
He has mobilized up the
that
ranks.
Old myth.
And now basically he's hobnobbing with the aristocrat, right? And
he's an
aspirational
hero.
Yeah, he is the person where it's like, oh, I could be that, kind of thing. And he's also a scientist. So he is representing this new breed of like rationalism, science, industry, all that stuff, right? So that's his archetype in the book. So these three suitors are interested in Lucy. Lucy's interested in them, but so she's kind of coquettish. Not as much as like people want you to believe, but there's something to that. But
nobody calls her a tease. I don't remember that line.
She's so. However, unfortunately, when Dracula shows up, he immediately latches onto her, no pun intended, and starts to drain her life away, right? So Mina is preoccupied worrying about wherever her fiancé Jonathan went. Eventually, because he escapes, he makes his way to a convent, a nunnery, where they save him. So that's some of your earliest signs of like the Catholic Church, or in this case, it's probably an Orthodox church, frankly. Being a refuge from like the evil darkness and things like that. She travels there. While she travels to go meet her husband, Lucy dies at the hand of Dracula. They try to save her through blood transfusion. This is another example of Bram Stoker being like, science, like how cool is this? Right.
I mean, it didn't work, but yeah.
It did. Well, and it's also funny because it was such a new technology that like we know better now. And so they're all like, she just needs blood. But like, we know about blood types now, right? And so at the time, he didn't. And so it's like, just pump her full of blood. And it's like, that only works if it's like the right blood type, right? But we're just going to assume they were all O positive, folks. And so, they all, whatever. And that doesn't work, unfortunately. tries to put the garlic up, but the garlic keeps getting brought down. That doesn't work. Go back to our last episode to learn about garlic. And so she dies. This is where Mike got to, folks. Boo.
Yeah. All right,
so she starts coming back. She starts coming back to life. And then there's all these newspaper clippings of like the Bloofer lady, which is just like Cockney for beautiful. That's what Bloofer means. So it's the beautiful lady. And the beautiful lady is roaming around graveyards, hunting children and, killing children, basically. And so Van Helsing gets brought in from Dr. Seward. Van Helsing was Dr. Seward's Dutch teacher. And he is the hero of the story. He's the one that has the open mind. He's the devout Christian and the noble scientist all rolled into one. And he's like, you guys got a vampire in your hands. And he convinces them to go and, dispatch Lucy in the correct way so that her soul is released from her vampiric prison, so to speak. At this time, Mina and Jonathan show back up, and Dracula attacks Mina. She gets partially turned. And the rest of the novel, they have to go. One of the parts of the folklore is that vampires have to sleep in their native soil. So Dracula has brought over a bunch of boxes of soil. So the second half Dracula, the book, turns into like a video game where they have to hunt around London trying to like find all of his different soil boxes and destroying them.
Those are the side quests.
Yeah. So hey, video game makers, you should make a super cool, like Assassin's Creed style story
where you're just like
based on Dracula
into the
and you go around and you're breaking up dirt boxes. But in the meantime, you got all kinds of dude. This would be such a good video game. Make this into an awesome video game, somebody. And then so Dracula's on his heels. He hightails it back to Transylvania, but they pursue him via train. Meanwhile, Mina has kind of like a psychic connection to Dracula because like of her like encounter with him. She gets burned with the Eucharist, the host, on her forehead. So she's got like a Eucharist host imprint on her forehead because she's unclean. They capture him in time and they kill him. Poor Quincy Morris dies, defeating Dracula. And but then Mina and Jonathan named their kid after Quincy. So all's well that ends well. The vampire vixens at the castle get killed by Van Helsing.
Okay.
Yeah. So, they get rid of the bad guy. And that's the nutshell, abbreviated form of the story Dracula. But as I was telling all that, you can see all these different themes that I was kind of poking out as I was giving the descriptions, right? When they are discussing Dracula, he's Antichrist. He is someone who is trying to spread his disease, his plague. He's trying to parasite society, and he's trying to turn people into Satanists, right? He's in the Van Helsing, he gives a history of the Dracula count, and he's like, he was an alchemist. He was a super intelligent dude who wanted to learn. He was like a Faustian character. Literally, he was Faust. And he delved too deeply into the occult, and that's what led to him turning into a vampire. So Bram Stoker, the foundation of Bram Stoker's characters, his vampiric knowledge, it's rooted in that deeper European lore of like, this is like the powers of darkness. This is Satan. This is, if you play with the occult, you turn into a vampire when you die.
Well, and it is interesting that you include that because the whole like, it's almost like the playing with fire, like, because like you mentioned, Bram Stoker, one of his big themes is integrating all of this new technology that the Industrial Revolution brought about. And what was medieval alchemy but a sort of like proto technology? I mean, it was techne. It was trying to,
it was. Yeah.
Now it was closer to, but again, because that's all magic was, right? Magic is just trying to manipulate.
It's just technology. Magic is just technology.
And so, isn't it interesting though that Van Helsing
technology is magic, folks? That works both ways. I literally believe that. Go on.
Van Helsing describes, or he talks about the history of Dracula as that was sort of like what got him down this path, was the alchemy or the, dappling with this sort of occult knowledge or hidden knowledge, or, it's almost like you can kind of see go back to that's one of the big themes. And he brings it in, Bram Stoker brings it in as like, this is just part of the setting now. But I wonder if it's a sort of almost like a warning, right? Where here's all the different ways that it's becoming a part of our world, but here's where we've seen it taken to its logical conclusion after however many hundreds of years, right? Because Dracula had been around for hundreds of years at this point, at the point in the story. Does that kind of make sense?
I do think that's true. So given the details of the story, having given you some context for the world that Stoker was operating in, and maybe you'll just one more time express, as you read this story, Christ is constantly invoked. And it's very much portrayed as the armies of darkness arrayed against the forces of Christianity. And so that's very on the forefront of, contextualizing these characters, saving their souls, right? This is all about, getting people to heaven and all that stuff, and embracing, faith as the means of waging war against the enemy and things like that. So what I want to do is go look into some of the themes, the academic themes that have been foisted upon this book.
Oh boy.
And then we'll touch upon Death of the Arthur stuff, because I think that people would be like, well, what about that? But let's go through the themes first.
Okay.
And then
what Dracula isn't. Is that what you mean?
Well,
this chapter?
it'll be interesting. This is going to be almost game-like. And so you have access to the outline, right?
Yeah, I'm looking at it.
I want you to just give us the rundown, starting just the way I have them written is fine.
The Wikipedia ones?
Yeah. All right. So
okay.
what are the Wikipedia? What does Wikipedia say the themes of Dracula are, Mike?
Well, the first one is gender and sexuality.
Oh, okay. How about the second one?
Race.
And the third one?
Disease.
Okay. Okay. Gender and sexuality, racism, and xenophobia,
race
disease.
And disease.
At least they have
Which, to be
disease
fair,
in there.
They're almost like big overarching categories that could fit. So obviously, if it's about race, then it includes xenophobia.
I love how Wikipedia doesn't even like talk about Jesus. It's like, if you go and get your knowledge of what Dracula is about from Wikipedia, you have no idea what Dracula is actually about. Wikipedia, this was a garbage article, Wikipedia. You keep asking me for like $3, and I am not going to give you $3 because your Dracula Wikipedia article is terrible. You can kind of tell the ideological background of the authors of these articles based upon what themes they mention and what language they use.
What lens are you going to look at it from?
Yeah,
right?
lens are you looking at?
You're going to have blind spots. You're going to have blind spots for sure.
Well, and so one of the things that I do want to point out, though, is the consistency of themes across those articles. If you have Wikipedia and lit charts agreeing on these themes, then you can kind of assume that there must be something to that, right? The problem is, how the language is, and then also kind of what the emphasis is. Because here is where I will lay down the facts here, folks. Sexuality is a minor topic within the novel Dracula. Now, you might not believe me even based upon the context of this conversation, because we've already given a few examples, right? I mean, Jonathan Harker seduced by vampires in the castle, and Lucy, she's all like coquettish and things like that, and she has all these like dudes trying to marry her and stuff. But those are the only examples. Now, we're going to talk about some things in addition to this, but those are the two biggest, most obvious examples in a 400 or 500 page novel that is every other page talking about how Jesus is Lord and vampires are satanic and science is awesome.
Which actually for the late 1800s is pretty, to have those juxtaposed is pretty profound too.
I just want to point out that if you read this novel, and your takeaway is that this is a book about sexuality, you're crazy.
It says more about you than it does the
you are
book.
bringing an awful lot of what you want to think about to
Like
this
I said,
book.
this was right around the time of Freud and stuff, so I mean that kind of makes sense.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes a pair of fangs is just a pair of fangs.
Yeah. Well, my favorite phrase, which would be inappropriate for this podcast, is vampire fangs are more about a tick, less about a fill in the blank.
Yeah, I gotcha.
It's a parasite. He's a parasite. If you think ticks are sexy, if you think leeches are like great euphemisms for sex, then vampires are for you, I guess.
And you can even just the way that Lucy is sort of described on her sickbed, on her deathbed, is like, if you wanted to make that a parallel to, I guess, the destruction that lust can cause, like in a soul or in a relationship, then that's maybe as far as it goes, And that's
they're
perfectly
not
fine, 'cause
mutually
that's perfectly,
exclusive. Yeah.
that's perfectly consistent with the Christian virtue ethic to say,
I think
that's what sin will do to you.
And I think I think that is what Bram Stoker does do in this novel. Because, so there's two main examples that the third thing. All right, so I already said that, you have an example of Jonathan Harker trying to be seduced by women. 3 of them, too. Harker, you dog. 3 foreign women coming to him in the bedroom. Then you also have Lucy with all these marriage proposals, and people like to make a big deal out of that. They like to make a big deal out of the blood transfusions. And I'll give credit where credit's due. There is a couple paragraphs, like some commentary on that, where after Lucy dies, she's going to marry Arthur Holmwood because, of course, she chooses the rich guy, right? I mean, like,
so stable, secure.
The cowboy and the scientist never stood a chance. Like, it's just the guy with the money.
Sounds like you're trying to turn Dracula into a romantic comedy.
There's Dracula Dead and Loving It, which is a really, really great funny comedy. The Mel Brooks one. Yeah, it's pretty well done. Leslie Nielsen stars Dracula. But the guy from Ghostbusters 2 stars Renfield. Check it out. It's fun. But he's like, we never got to marry in real life, but I feel like because I gave my blood to her, we've been married in a different way. And everyone else is like biting their knuckles at that point because everyone gave their blood to Lucy and he doesn't know that. And so there's like, yeah, literally in the text of the book, Van Helsing was like, I was trying really hard not to laugh at that moment. He admits that to Seward later on. And Seward is horrified. He's like, that's not funny. And Van Helsing's like, well, she's a polygamist if that's true, kind of thing. So people are like, oh, see, the blood transfusion, that's like the conjugal act, right? You don't have to take it that way. I get that's where like your modern mind is going to go to, but this is a sacramental novel. This is a novel about sacraments, right? Everything in the context of this novel is looking at things from the juxtaposition of science and sacrament. And so what Bram Stoker is doing in this moment is talking about blood transfusion as a kind of sacrament, a kind of union between people, explicitly not a sexual union, right? And they're talking about marriage. They're not. Now, I know that marriage and sex are very intertwined, right? I was going to
say, actually, this has an interesting parallel to the to sacramental theology, where a lot of times people will, because they think of things primarily through the lens of sex, people will hear about the union that we receive in the Eucharist, in communion, and say, oh, is it like, because Jesus talks about he's united to the church as a bride, right? A bridegroom and bride. So they'll say, oh, is the Eucharist like sex? And actually the more accurate understanding would be that sex is like the Eucharist. It's an imitation of the union that is experienced in this earth in the Eucharist, but obviously ultimately in heaven.
Exactly right. No, that's exactly right.
So that would be kind of the closer.
This isn't about
in talking about blood transfusion.
The blood transfusion is not about sex. The blood transfusion is about sacrament, and what's happening there is it's not salacious. And in the context of the novel, it's not presented as salacious. It's presented as holy. It's presented as matrimonial, right? And so, but then you have something that people call it like the blood wedding or something like that. This is what people will refer to Mina being attacked by Dracula as, because what happens
It was the
is
red wedding before the red wedding.
Yeah, that's what people are trying to do.
Check Game of Thrones off the bingo card.
Yep, you got it. But Dracula manages to get into the asylum because they all reconvene at the asylum where Dr. Seward works, and they're in these upper rooms, and Renfield's a captive at the asylum. So Renfield allows Dracula in. He's the one that invites Dracula into the building. Dracula manages to sneak up to the bedroom where Jonathan and Mina are sleeping, and he goes and he knocks Harker out, and then he goes and he makes Mina drink his blood, right? And at which point Mina's like, unclean. She like has a mental breakdown. I've been polluted. This is terrible, blah, blah, blah. And yes, this is a satanic sacrament. This is still like satanic inversion of like sacramental union, because we've already had the blood transfusion stuff for like noble and holy reasons with like the people trying to save Lucy. Now you have the exchange of blood with the vampire, but it's all done for her destruction, right? And so and it's not portrayed as a good or sexy thing in the novel. Now, if people want to just insist upon making this a sexual thing, it's rape. Okay? Like she's roofied, and he is taking advantage of her against her will in the most insidious way possible. And none of this should be titillating to anybody, right? So it irks me that people want to pretend like this book is all about like, or vampires. What's cool about vampires is their sex appeal. And it's like, man, that is so far removed from the folklore. That is so far removed from the book of Dracula itself. Like, you need to like read the book and then come back and talk to me about how sexy Dracula is.
Well, and it goes back to your main point, which is it's trying to show the destructive nature of sin. And even if you wanted to look at it through the lens of sexual sin, it's still showing how destructive it is and how ugly it is, actually. I mean, and really that's, if anything, that's the, guess positive sort of takeaway from it too.
Well, and if you another thing that you can contrast the seduction of Jonathan with what happens to Mina. Jonathan gives his first person perspective of the seduction. He's like, I was like strangely drawn to them, and I knew it was wrong, but like there was something going on there, kind of thing. Whereas Mina's self-profession, like is none of that. She is unconscious the whole time. She talks about how she couldn't resist him. So I think that people want to like read into that it's like a willful thing. But no, it's they're differently described. The novel itself paints these as different experiences. And then also the other thing, everyone wants to talk about how Lucy is this like, kind of like lusty woman kind of thing. And she's not. It's exaggerated, but like, if you're going to tell me that the main factor of what happens to Lucy is that she becomes like a lusty woman, and you're talking about like female sexuality and, oh, Lucy has to be dispatched because now she's got like sexual agency and things like that. I just want to remind you, all of her victims are young children. Like 6 and 7 years old.
What do you end up saying? Yeah.
What are you trying to say, folks?
Is that the cart you want to attach your horse to?
I want a million academic papers on, female pedophilia rooted in Dracula's story by Monday, because that's silly, right? She does try to seduce her husband as an undead person, but again, that's because vampires kill their loved ones. vampires
yeah.
attack their loved ones, and
That goes
yeah,
back
that
to your
does mean
story
that
from
does mean
last week
husbands
where
too.
the dad comes back and wants his family to let him in because, in a sense, if the whole idea, and you mentioned this last week at the root of the vampire like idea is that disease was coming and sweeping through communities, it was going to be the loved ones that were going to kill you, right? If when it's communicable disease. And
Yep.
so in the same way, if it's this sort of metaphor for death itself, then it's going to be her loved one that she's going to have most access to, or going to be the one that she's able to, affect.
Absolutely, yeah. So, I mean, in a nutshell, Dracula is like the most pious book you'll ever read. It's crazy pious, but what's cool about it is it's not afraid because these themes of like the danger of sexuality, yeah, there's some of that in there for sure. So it's not like a Puritan book. It's
No,
not
that's just it.
puritanical. It's just really pious.
It's
And
not, yeah, it's not a moralistic tale,
yeah,
even though it has morals or something.
and it's an embrace of the modern. It's an embrace of Christian culture against, but it's also a rejection of the rejection of faith. It's like, hey, we can be modern and still be Christian. We can be modern and still be devout, right? Bram Stoker is not H.G. Wells, like he is still clearly he wrote a very pious book, right? I don't really know enough about his personal piety, but the book and there's so many examples that of Dracula of fiction that aren't as pious.
Mhm.
In other words, he writes an unusually Christian themed book
Yeah.
in a
And
sea
even
of
like you said,
examples that are not.
the original vampire books were not even necessarily the most pious either. So it's almost like,
Some of the
you
more
know,
popular ones leading up to this, yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah,
it,
it's a mix. It's a mix.
if you want to call it a co-opting, or you could say it's grace building upon nature, right? If you have the nature of the vampire story, and then you have this person who, like we both said, even if he wasn't a part of this ancient Christian sacramental tradition, I mean, Church of Ireland, Church of England, still in many ways is very sacramental in its view. Like,
Yeah,
in
they're
terms
high
of like,
church. Yeah.
yeah, in terms of the Protestant church, that's probably the as close as you can get to Eastern Orthodox and Catholic. But either way, he was very Catholic sensitive, as we've already talked about. And so he's in a good position
Not
where,
according to knowledge, though. He really abuses the Eucharist.
well,
You can tell.
okay,
You
so
can tell that he wants, because he like has a quote unquote an indulgence from the Pope to be like use the Eucharist as a weapon against the vampire, and so you have like tons of like embarrassing. It's embarrassing lack of knowledge on his part. To
but
me,
in
it
the
reads
same
like a
way that he had
Protestant
a
who
lack of
likes the Catholic
knowledge,
Church,
yeah,
but he doesn't. But he doesn't know enough about it to like
it's a
write about it
fanboy,
well.
yeah.
Yeah,
But in the
he
same
he
way, he made mistakes about blood transfusion too, and so
yeah.
it's still kind of part of this, like, new world. Not, and it does show that while he may be a observer of it, there's still a difference between being immersed in it. And
Yeah.
so that's where you can kind of, and again, not that I'm trying to like justify it or anything like that, but I will say that, some of the themes that you've kind of been discussing does make me want to go back and reinvestigate, or at least finish the book too. So
There's very, very good audio versions of this book that I think are really, really engaging. So I would highly recommend you check out some ones on
Jacob
Audible.
wants to give me such a hard time for not finishing when I actually read it, and he just listens to it. When, he's like, "Oh, how did you not finish that book?" And it's like, "Oh, you mean the one that you have while you're at work and it's on double speed and all that, Jacob."
Work smarter, not harder, Mike. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah,
embrace the human tradition of storytelling.
Embrace technology. Is that what you're going to say, Bram
Hey,
Stoker?
there you go. See, technology can be your friend if used in the right way. Oh, hey, one last thought before we wrap up. There's I just found out. I literally just read it this week. There's an Icelandic version of Dracula that Bram Stoker like signed off on that was written in his lifetime that is completely different than his version of it. And for 100 years, we will probably. For 100 years, everyone just thought there was like an Icelandic translation of Dracula. And somehow, like, I guess, like, Icelanders didn't read the English version.
See, I was going to say
English people didn't read the
Either.
Icelandic. And so everyone had, nobody had any idea that there was just a completely different book. And I read it this week, and it's really interesting. And the one thing I'll say about it, though, is it's the book that everyone thinks Dracula is.
Oh, that is
it
interesting.
really reinforces how pious Bram Stoker's novel is, because the Icelandic one, while still having tons of super interesting themes that are present in Bram Stoker's, is way more salacious. It's way more secular, basically, and it's like a weird Elseworlds like version of Dracula. It's like, this is the one you've all been talking about for 100 years, and you had no idea it existed. You should have just wrote all your academic papers on this guy, and then at least you'd have integrity.
That's an easy change, though. All you got to do is just put the Iceland in parentheses next to Dracula, and
it's called The Powers of Darkness. It's got a pretty cool title too.
Interesting.
Check it out.
Well, I hope you are satisfied, Jacob, as satisfied as we are.
I feel like I got a lot off my chest. I feel like I got that weird vampire nightmare off my chest.
But it's about time. Yeah. Hey, you got to save that for that's different episode art. You're going to use that for
I know.
Thank you guys for coming to listen to this conversation on, we're not going to call it the redemption of Dracula, because we already have redemption in a different title, but in Jacob's, soliloquy, we'll say, of Dracula and its critics.
Jacob rants about Dracula. Dracula is not sexy.
Don't forget to like and subscribe to the show, leave a 5-star rating, positive review, and that just kind of helps our show get out to more people. More people can listen and get in on these fun conversations that we enjoy having.
Just remember, kids, Dracula doesn't suck.
Womp womp.
Thanks for listening to Voyage Podcast. The Voyage Podcast is a production of Voyage Comics and Publishing, which seeks to create exceptional entertainment informed by Catholic values that inspire people to live a heroic life. Voyage Comics seeks to advance truth and beauty found in powerful stories. To learn more, visit voyagecomics.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.